Welcome back to Life Skills and another episode on my homemade CO2 laser cutter build. This week I finished the Z-axis workbed that can be raised and lowered by the CNC controller that will drive the laser cutter. I began by CADing and 3D printing a pair of clips for the ends of the bed. I then installed threaded flanges into these clips so that the Z-axis stepper motors can turn a threaded rod to raise and lower the bed. All of the assembly video in this episode is presented at 4 times normal speed to compress several days' work into 20 minutes. Next, I needed to precisely locate the feet for the Z-axis motor mount. I used 2 short lengths of conduit, one of the motor mounts and the threaded rod to locate the feet correctly beneath the flange and clip I just installed in the middle of the end of the bed. These are prints of just the bottom of the feet that I made for precisely locating the screw holes before drilling. After the issues I had with strip threaded inserts, I decided to simply screw these feet to the base. The forces will be mostly straight down, so I think this will be fine. And I could always put threaded inserts in at a later date. I based my Z-axis bed lifting design on the MPCNC's original Z-axis tool lifting design, so I'm consulting the assembly instructions for that just to make sure I have the details fresh in my mind as I assemble them. I'll put a link to those instructions in the episode description if you want to check them out. All of the blue 3D printed parts are parts I printed above and beyond what are normally required for building an MPCNC. Full disclosure, I am not a machinist, nor do I have any real machining tools, just a good assortment of DIY workshop tools. Neither am I an engineer, so building a precision machining tool like a laser cutter is definitely a stretch for me. But challenging projects are the most fun and rewarding, and they teach us the most. The MPCNC is designed to have one stepper motor for the Z-axis, as it is usually mounted at the intersection of the X and Y axes for raising and lowering whatever CNC tool one has installed. As such, I needed to modify the wiring of my system so that the two Z-axis motors could be controlled together to raise both ends of the bed in a synchronized manner. I worked out a wiring diagram with all of the wire color codes before beginning the process. I began by twisting the wires together and covering them with loose heat shrink tubing so that I could test the system before soldering. Once I tested the system, I slid the heat shrink tubing back, soldered the connections, recovered them with the tubing, and shrank it with a heat gun. And another test before moving on to the next step. Testing often is a habit I developed writing software. These are square aluminum extrusions from a gate of some sort. I found them in an outbuilding when I bought this house 20 years ago and held on to them like the hoarder I try not to be because I knew they were expensive and would come in handy someday. Today was that day. I am drilling a small hole in each end of the aluminum posts for a small bolt that will hold them to brackets I 3D printed and thereby to the side rails of the bed. Next, I am drilling a larger hole in one side of each end to give me access to the head of the bolt for tightening it. By using stop blocks on my drill press, I am able to quickly locate the pieces for drilling in the same measured location. Here you can see the larger hole centered over the smaller hole. These are conduit clamps designed by Ryan, the same engineer who designed the rest of the MPCNC. While these are not part of the original MPCNC, I printed them in gray instead of blue just so the bed would look nicer. And now I assemble the aluminum extrusions to the side rails of the bed via those clamps to support the steel web that will hold workpieces for cutting. This is expanded steel lath that you can find in the plaster and drywall section of a home improvement store. I need to cut it to fit my bed. I suppose I could have used tin snips, but they tend to curl what you cut, and since this is mild, unhardened steel, and my circular saw blade has carbide teeth, it's no problem to cut a nice straight line that way. Gloves are a good idea to avoid shredding your hands when working with this stuff, especially with cut ends. I trimmed around the 3D printed trucks and Z-axis brackets so that the bed would lay flat. The bed is tipping a bit, but off camera I tightened up the trucks a bit to stop that once the assembly was complete. Here I'm cutting steel wire to make staples to hold the bed down to the aluminum extrusions. And one more test with a piece of plywood on the bed. As you can see, this plywood has a few cuts in it from the commercial laser cutter in my former lab, so it'll be one of the first things I test cut on my homemade laser cutter. Hopefully soon.